My daughter scornfully declared that I'd get nothing from my ex-wife's $40 million will, just a pathetic loser who abandoned his family. She sat in a lavish office, certain of her victory, but then the lawyer read one sentence. Anne smiled. That moment changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing marble floors that probably cost more than my annual income. My Honda Civic looked pathetic in the parking garage next to those gleaming Mercedes and BMWs. The security guard had given me that look, the one that says, "You don't belong here, old man. Hope you at least get offered coffee. That's all you're getting here." Emily's sharp whisper hit me before I'd even settled into the leather chair across from her. 20 years since our last real conversation, and this was her greeting. She didn't look up from her phone, designer heels tapping against the marble with calculated precision. "Emmy, please, don't call me that." Her voice could have frozen the Pacific Ocean, visible through these 42nd floor windows. "And don't pretend we're close." I adjusted my old suit jacket, suddenly aware of every thread that had seen better days. This office screamed money, floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract art that probably cost more than my Sacramento apartment, technology I couldn't begin to understand. Emily fit perfectly here in her black designer dress, makeup flawless despite being at her mother's will reading. Jim Whitaker cleared his throat, arranging documents with the careful precision of someone who'd done this countless times. His weathered face held genuine sympathy as he glanced between us. "Coffee, Mr. Harlan." "Please." My voice came out rougher than intended. Emily finally looked up, her eyes scanning my appearance with unconcealed distaste. "Yes, let's finish this farce quickly. I have a meeting at 5. Your mother left very specific wishes for this procedure," Jim said, his tone professional but kind. He'd been Margaret's attorney for decades, had seen our family's rise and spectacular fall. She was always meticulous about business matters. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Emily's head snapped up, fury blazing in eyes that looked exactly like her mother's. "Don't talk about Mom in past tense like you knew her. You walked away, remember?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. My hands, cracked from years of construction work, trembled slightly as I reached for the coffee cup. Outside, a helicopter buzzed past the window, its rotors catching the afternoon sun. "Shall we begin?" Jim's intervention came like a lifeline. He opened the leather portfolio, documents crisp and official. Margaret always did love her paperwork, every detail planned to perfection. Even in death, she was orchestrating events from beyond. Emily leaned back in her chair, confidence radiating from every pore. Why wouldn't she be confident? Margaret had built an empire after our divorce. The coffee shops, the real estate investments, the stock portfolio. Of course it would all go to their daughter. Mrs. Harlan had very detailed instructions about how this should proceed, Jim continued, glancing at me with something that might have been pity. "It's important we follow the exact sequence she specified." A seagull landed on the window ledge outside, its beady eyes seeming to peer into the room. Margaret always said seagulls were persistent creatures, never giving up on what they wanted. Maybe that's why she'd thrived after leaving me behind. My throat felt dry despite the excellent coffee. 20 years of silence, and now this. Why had she included me at all? The mutual friends who'd called about her death had been surprised too. Cancer, they'd said. 6 months from diagnosis to this. Jim cleared his throat and began, "Your wife left very detailed instructions about..." But his words seemed to fade as my mind drifted back to that phone call a week ago, when everything changed again. Jim's voice faded into background noise as my thoughts pulled me back to that phone call a week ago. I'd been fixing the leaky faucet in my small Sacramento apartment when the phone rang. "Mr. Harlan, this is James Whitaker. I represented your ex-wife, Margaret." Represented? Past tense. The word hit me like a physical blow. "She passed away yesterday. I'm calling because, well, you're mentioned in her will." The wrench had slipped from my hands, clattering into the sink. 20 years of silence, and suddenly I was back in her life through legal documents. The mutual friend who'd told me about her illness months ago had seemed as shocked as I was. "Why now, Maggie?" I'd whispered to my empty apartment. Why, after all these years of silence? The apartment felt smaller after that call. 2 bedrooms in a complex built in the 80s. Furniture from thrift stores, everything functional but worn. Such a contrast to this marble palace where I now sat, watching Emily flip through magazine pages with deliberate indifference. "Can we start already?" Emily's voice cut through my memories. "I have a meeting at 5. She didn't look up from her fashion magazine. Each page turned a statement of boredom. Designer everything, from her shoes to her handbag. Margaret had clearly made sure their daughter never wanted for anything. "Your mother left very detailed instructions," Jim repeated patiently. "It's important to follow the sequence." I wiped sweat from my forehead, trying to focus. The week since that phone call had passed in a blur. 3 days to arrange time off from the construction site, 2 days to drive down from Sacramento, 1 day to find clothes decent enough for this meeting. My supervisor had been understanding. Death in the family, even an ex-family, earned sympathy. "She was always meticulous about business matters," I said, remembering Margaret's color-coded filing systems. Emily's head snapped up, fury blazing. "Don't talk about Mom in past tense like you knew her." The accusation stung because it held truth. I hadn't known her, not the woman she'd become. The Margaret I'd married was a dreamer who wanted to open a small bookstore. This Margaret had built a coffee empire, owned property across 3 states, invested in stocks I couldn't even pronounce. A helicopter passed the window again, its steady thrum mixing with the city noise 42 floors below. I thought about that modest apartment, my truck with 200,000 miles, the simple life I'd built after she'd asked for the divorce. No bitterness in that request, just a quiet certainty that we'd grown in different directions. Different directions? That's how she'd phrased it, not, "I don't love you anymore," or "You're not enough." Just different directions, like we were trains leaving the same station. But she'd included me in her will. After 2 decades of Christmas cards with no return address, birthday gifts for Emily sent through intermediaries, complete radio silence. She'd remembered me at the end. Jim arranged more papers, occasionally glancing at me with sympathy. He'd known us both during happier times, had drawn up the divorce papers with professional kindness. Margaret had been fair then, too, taking nothing she hadn't brought into the marriage herself. The magazine pages rustled as Emily turned them faster, impatience radiating from every gesture. She probably assumed this was a formality, that I'd get some token gesture while she inherited the real wealth. Why wouldn't she think that? Margaret had rebuilt everything without me. My cracked hands looked ancient against the polished conference table. 45 years of physical labor left marks that no amount of lotion could erase. Emily's manicured nails caught the light as she checked her phone again, each gesture screaming success and affluence. Emily's sharp voice snapped me back to the present. "Well, are we doing this or not?" But her words about not knowing Mom stirred something deeper. Suddenly I was 25 years old again, standing in that university library where I'd first seen Margaret bent over her books, completely absorbed in whatever she was reading. The university library smelled like old paper and possibility. Margaret sat at the corner table, surrounded by stacks of business textbooks, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light, streaming through tall windows. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, but something about her concentration drew my attention. I'd been shelving books as part of my work-study program when she looked up, catching me staring. "Are you going to help, or just stand there holding that book?" Her smile took any sting out of the words. I glanced down at the volume in my hands, Modern Marketing Principles, then at her pile of similar texts. "Business major?" "Double major, Business and English Literature." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I'm Margaret, and you're the guy who's been reorganizing the poetry section. How did you know that?" "Alphabetical by author instead of the weird subject classifications. Much better system." She closed her textbook, giving me her full attention. "I'm Bob, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Bob, by the way." We talked until the library closed that night. Dreams and plans, the future spread out before us like an unwritten story. She wanted to combine her loves, literature and business. Maybe open a bookstore with literary events, coffee, community gatherings. "Bob," Jim's voice pulled me back to the present conference room. "Are you ready to continue?" Emily had stopped pretending to read her magazine, watching me with suspicious eyes. "Is he having some kind of episode?" "I'm fine." The words came out hoarse. "Just remembering." "Well, stop remembering and start listening," Emily snapped. Some of us have actual lives to get back to. Jim cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should take a moment before proceeding with the reading. No moments? Emily's voice could have cut glass. Read the will, give him whatever token Mom left out of guilt, and let's move on. Token. She assumed I'd get something small, meaningless. Maybe she was right. Maybe Margaret had left me a book or some piece of furniture from our old life together. A gesture toward closure, nothing more. But then why the elaborate setup? Why the specific instructions about sequence and procedure? Margaret never did anything without careful planning. The leather portfolio lay open on the table, official documents with gold seals and legal language, 20 years of separation, and it all came down to these papers. Whatever Margaret had decided would reshape both our lives, though Emily couldn't see that yet. Your mother's instructions were quite specific about the order of disclosure, Jim said carefully. She wanted certain things explained before others. Explained? Emily's voice pitched higher. What needs explaining? She leaves me her estate, maybe gives Dad some keepsake, and we're done. Jim's expression suggested it wouldn't be that simple. He'd known Margaret longer than either of us, had watched her transform from that dreamy college girl into a business empire builder. If anyone understood her final moves, it would be him. The seagull returned to the window ledge, bold as brass, staring into the room like it had a stake in the proceedings. Margaret would have laughed at that, would have made some comment about persistence and stubbornness. She was always 3 steps ahead, I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. What did you say? Emily demanded. Your mother. She always planned everything carefully, thought through all the angles. You wouldn't know. You weren't there. The accusation hung between us, true and painful. I hadn't been there for the business success, the real estate purchases, the stock investments. Hadn't been there when she got sick, when she made these final decisions. But I'd been there at the beginning, when dreams were bigger than bank accounts and love mattered more than profit margins. I'd been there when she was still Maggie, not Margaret, when her laugh could fill a room and her optimism was infectious. Jim opened the first document, his movements deliberate and careful. Whatever came next would change everything. I could feel it in the weight of the silence, in Emily's sudden stillness, in the way afternoon light slanted across the marble floor. The last will and testament of Margaret Rose Harlan, Jim began, his voice carrying the gravity of finality. Emily's accusation about abandoning them pulled me back to that painful morning at the cemetery, where she'd made it brutally clear I wasn't welcome at Margaret's final farewell. The Honda Civic looked embarrassingly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs crowding the Beverly Hills Cemetery parking lot. Palm trees swayed in the ocean breeze as I walked along marble pathways, white chrysanthemums clutched in my weathered hands. Margaret had always loved simple flowers. The security guard had checked my invitation twice, clearly skeptical that someone like me belonged at this elite gathering. Margaret's business associates clustered near the graveside in expensive black attire, their designer sunglasses reflecting the California sun. I found a spot under a palm tree, far enough back to pay my respects without causing a scene. The priest's eulogy painted Margaret as a visionary entrepreneur, a devoted mother, a pillar of the community. All true, but missing the woman who used to laugh at old movies and make pancakes shaped like animals. That's when Emily spotted me. She marched across the marble walkway like a woman declaring war, her designer black dress probably costing more than my monthly rent. Every eye followed her dramatic approach, whispers rippling through the assembled mourners. "What are you doing here?" Her voice carried across the manicured lawns. "You have no right to be here." The priest paused mid-sentence, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding at his carefully orchestrated service. Margaret's business partners turned to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. "Emmy, I was with your mother for 25 years, and left when things got hard." She gestured wildly, her voice rising with each word. "Don't embarrass these people with your fake grief." The mourners shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out phones to capture the spectacle. This wasn't the dignified farewell Margaret would have wanted, but Emily seemed beyond caring about propriety. "I came to say goodbye, that's all. You should have said goodbye 20 years ago." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Look around, Dad. See all these successful people? They were here for Mom when it mattered. Where were you?" I wanted to tell her about the Christmas cards I'd sent that were never answered, the birthday gifts returned unopened. about calling the hospital when I heard about her illness, only to be told visitors weren't welcome. Instead, I stood quietly, holding my simple flowers while elaborate arrangements surrounded Margaret's casket like a fortress of guilt and money. "And don't expect anything from the inheritance," Emily continued, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper that somehow carried further than her shouts. "Mom left everything to people who actually cared about her." The security guard stepped closer, ready to intervene if necessary. Margaret's associates watched with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. Her words about the inheritance hit harder than her public rejection. I never cared about money, but her assumption that I expected nothing stung, as if 25 years of marriage could be erased by 20 years of silence. The priest cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of his service. Emily shot him a look that could have withered the palm trees, then stalked back to her place among the mourners, leaving me standing alone under the swaying fronds. I placed the chrysanthemums on a side table and walked back to my Honda, feeling every judgmental stare burning into my back. As Jim's voice brought me back to the present conference room, I wondered if she'd been right to dismiss me so completely. Jim's formal voice cut through my painful memory, bringing me back to this moment of truth. "Let me read the official provisions of Margaret Harlan's last will and testament." Emily straightened in her chair, that familiar smugness returning to her face. She'd probably already mentally redecorated the Lake Tahoe house, planned vacations with her inheritance money. Her phone lay forgotten on the marble table, all attention focused on Jim's methodical document handling. "Emily Harlan receives the Lake Tahoe house and the sum of $300,000. "What?" Emily's voice cracked slightly. "That's all?" Jim continued reading, his professional tone unwavering despite her interruption. "Contingent upon working at the company for 3 years under the supervision of—" "Under whose supervision?" Emily half rose from her chair, gripping the table edge. "Who's now running Mom's company?" The helicopter passed the window again, its rotors beating like my suddenly racing heart. Something in Jim's expression, careful, almost apologetic, made my stomach clench with inexplicable dread. "Robert Harlan receives 51% of Harlan Organic Industries, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios, valued at approximately $12.7 million. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Emily's face drained of color, her knuckles white against the dark table surface. My own hands had gone numb, the coffee cup slipping slightly in my grasp. That's not possible." Emily's whisper barely reached across the table. "Mom wouldn't... She couldn't have..." Jim set down the document, his expression genuinely sympathetic now. "I'm afraid it's quite legal and binding, Emily. Your mother was very specific about these arrangements." I stared at him, mouth dry, trying to process numbers that seemed impossible. $12 million? A controlling stake in Margaret's empire. The woman who'd asked for a quiet divorce because we'd grown apart had left me everything she'd built without me. "She was sick!" Emily's voice rose to near hysteria. "Mom wasn't thinking clearly. This is insane." The seagull returned to the window ledge, cocking its head as if interested in the human drama playing out inside. Margaret would have laughed at that, would have made some comment about birds being better judges of character than people. Emily stood abruptly, pacing to the windows with jerky, agitated movements. "There has to be a mistake, some kind of clerical error. Mom built that company after Dad left us. She wouldn't give it back to him." "Your mother was quite lucid when she made these decisions," Jim said carefully. "In fact, she left specific instructions about how to handle any challenges to the will." My throat felt constricted, as if the marble walls were closing in. Construction worker to multi-millionaire in the space of a legal reading. It felt like winning a lottery I'd never entered, getting a prize I'd never wanted. "How long ago?" I managed to croak. "How long ago did she write this?" "The final version was signed 6 months ago," Jim replied, "though the basic structure dates back nearly 3 years. 3 years? While I was replacing broken windows and patching roof leaks, Margaret was rewriting her legacy. While Emily was living her wealthy lifestyle, assuming permanent inheritance, Margaret was planning this earthquake. Emily spun from the window, her designer dress swirling around her legs like dark water. "He manipulated her. Somehow he got to Mom when she was vulnerable." "Emmy, don't you dare call me that." Spittle flew from her lips, her careful makeup finally showing cracks. Not now, not ever. Emily's stunned silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then I saw something dangerous flicker in her eyes. The same look she'd had at the cemetery, but sharper now, more focused. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. When Emily finally found her voice, it came out sharp and accusatory, cutting through the office air like a blade. He manipulated Mom. She was sick, couldn't think clearly. She gestured wildly at me, her perfectly manicured hands shaking with rage. Look at him, living in some tiny apartment, driving that piece of junk car. Of course he'd sweet-talk his way back into her life when she was dying. I sat motionless, letting her fury wash over me. 20 years of separation, and she still saw me as the villain of her story. Emmy, I haven't even spoken to your mother in 5 years. Don't call me Emmy! You lost that right. Her voice reached a pitch that made the windows seem to vibrate. You lost every right when you walked away from us. Jim cleared his throat diplomatically, reaching for something beneath the conference table. Perhaps this will clarify Mrs. Harlan's mental state at the time of these decisions. He pulled out what looked like a laptop computer, setting it carefully on the marble surface. His movements were deliberate, professional, like someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Your mother anticipated there might be questions about her competency. Jim's fingers worked the keyboard with practiced efficiency. She recorded this message specifically to address such concerns. The room's lights dimmed automatically as a projection screen descended from the ceiling, modern technology in service of the dead, Margaret reaching across the grave to control this moment just as she'd controlled everything else in life. Emily stopped pacing, her face pale in the artificial twilight. What is this? Your mother's final message, Jim said simply, pressing a key. Margaret's face appeared on screen, pale but resolute, propped up in what was clearly a hospital bed. She wore a simple blue robe, her gray hair pulled back in the practical style she'd adopted in her final months. But her eyes were sharp, alert, unmistakably present. Bob, she said, and I found myself reaching toward the screen involuntarily. If you're watching this, I want to thank you for coming today, despite everything that's happened between us. Emily made a small, choked sound. No, Mom couldn't have. Margaret's recorded voice continued, calm and measured. I know Emily will have questions about my mental capacity, about whether I was manipulated or coerced into these decisions. I want to make it absolutely clear that I am of sound mind and body, or as sound as this cancer will allow. The hospital room behind her was unmistakably real. IV stands, monitoring equipment, the institutional furniture that screams medical facility. But Margaret's voice was steady, her gaze direct and unwavering. These provisions represent my own choices, made after careful consideration and extensive consultation with my legal team. No one has influenced these decisions except my own conscience. Emily collapsed into her chair as if her legs had given out. But why? Why would she? Margaret's image flickered slightly on the screen as she took a labored breath. Bob, there are things I need to tell you about our marriage, about the mistakes I made that I never had the courage to admit while I was alive. Margaret's labored breath on the screen seemed to echo in the silent room as she continued. Bob, I need to tell you about the betrayals, about how money changed me into someone I didn't recognize. Emily made a small choking sound, but Margaret's recorded voice pressed forward with the determination of someone who knew this was her last chance to speak the truth. I had affairs, Bob. Multiple affairs with business partners, investors, anyone who could help me climb higher. Her image flickered slightly as she adjusted her position in the hospital bed. You suspected, didn't you? That's why you were so quiet those last months before you left. My hands gripped the chair armrests so tightly my knuckles turned white. 20 years, I'd wondered if I'd been paranoid, if my growing suspicions had been unfounded jealousy. Now, from beyond the grave, Margaret was confirming what I'd been too afraid to confront. Emily, you inherited my beauty, but not my soul, Margaret continued, her gaze seeming to look directly at our daughter. You got the shallow success, the material wealth, but Bob always knew the true value of things. I forgot that. Mom, no, Emily whispered, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. The coffee shops were built on lies, sweetheart. Contracts secured through bedroom negotiations, partnerships bought with betrayal. Bob deserves that company more than anyone, because he helped create it with honest work before I corrupted everything we'd built together. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but fought to maintain composure. This was what I'd waited 20 years to hear. Not an apology exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition that I hadn't been the failure she'd made me feel like. Margaret coughed on screen, the sound harsh and wet, reminding us all of her mortality. I'm giving Bob control because he represents the values I abandoned. He'll know what to do with the business, whether that's running it with integrity or selling it and starting fresh. Jim reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope, his movements respectful and deliberate. Your mother also left this personal letter, he said quietly, breaking the seal with careful precision. He cleared his throat and began reading in Margaret's own words. Dear Bob, forgive me for losing myself in the pursuit of wealth and status. You tried to hold us together while I was busy tearing us apart. The company should have always been ours, not mine. Maggie? The word escaped my lips like a prayer. The letter continued through Jim's steady voice. You were the anchor I cut loose because I thought I could sail farther without you. I was wrong about everything except your character. Take what I built and make it worthy of the man you remained when I couldn't stay the woman you married. Emily sat frozen, staring at her mother's image on the screen as if seeing a stranger. Her perfect world, built on the foundation of her saintly mother and worthless father, was crumbling with each revelation. Margaret's recorded voice grew weaker, but more urgent. Bob, don't let Emily's anger poison what's left of our family. She's more like me than I wanted her to be, but there's still time for her to choose a different path. The video ended with Margaret reaching toward the camera, as if trying to touch the people she knew would be watching. Her hand lingered there for a moment before the screen went black. Jim closed the laptop with a soft click, the silence stretching between us like a bridge neither Emily nor I knew how to cross. As Margaret's image faded and Jim closed the laptop, the silence stretched between us. I felt Emily's eyes on me, waiting. For the first time in 20 years, I had something to say to my daughter. The silence stretched until I found my voice. I didn't leave you, Emmy. I left what we had become. The lies, the betrayals, the toxicity that was poisoning all of us. Emily's face crumpled for a moment before hardening again. She stood abruptly, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor as she headed for the door. I need air, she announced, not looking back. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the window where that persistent seagull still perched. Jim and I sat in the aftermath, the weight of Margaret's confessions settling around us like dust after an explosion. Your wife carried a lot of guilt, Jim said softly. She spent the last year rewriting that will, trying to find a way to make amends. She didn't need to give me anything, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Hearing the truth was enough. 5 minutes passed before Emily returned, her expression transformed. Gone was the raw emotion, replaced by a calculated smile that reminded me uncomfortably of Margaret in her corporate mode. Dad, she began, settling back into her chair with studied casualness. Maybe we should talk privately. Work out some arrangement that makes sense for both of us? We can talk here. I have no secrets. Her smile brightened, but I could see the calculation behind it now. Margaret's revelations had taught me something about recognizing masks. You have to understand, you're behind the times, Emily continued, her tone patronizing but wrapped in false concern. Modern business is complicated. Digital marketing, social media management, supply chain optimization. It's not like the construction work you're used to. I nodded, letting her continue. Mom's company needs someone who understands contemporary markets, who can speak to investors and board members. No offense, but showing up in that old Honda isn't going to inspire confidence. Jim watched our exchange with interest, his hand resting protectively on the legal documents. You're probably right, I agreed. I don't understand modern business the way you do. Emily's smile became genuine for the first time since we'd sat down. Exactly, so we could work together. You could be a silent partner, collect dividends, and I could handle the day-to-day operations. Everyone wins. Maybe I don't need to understand it, I continued, meeting her eyes directly. Maybe what the company needs isn't someone who knows how to manipulate social media or charm investors. Maybe it needs someone who remembers why it was started in the first place. The smile faltered. Dad, be realistic. You're 70 years old. You've been out of business for decades. The employees won't respect you, the clients won't trust you. You'll run mom's life's work into the ground. Your mother's life's work was built on lies and betrayals, I said quietly. Maybe running it into the ground would be the honest thing to do. Emily's careful composure cracked, like expensive veneer peeling away from rotted wood. You can't be serious. That company employs hundreds of people. You destroy all their livelihoods out of some misguided sense of justice? I didn't say I would destroy it. I said maybe it would be honest to admit what it really is. Her forced smile began to crack as she realized her usual charm wasn't working. I saw something dangerous flash in her eyes, the same look she'd inherited from Margaret in her worst moments. Emily's fake smile vanished entirely as she began pacing the room like a trapped animal. This washed-up ex-husband has no right to Mother's company, she declared to no one in particular. The mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating corporate predator beneath. Her movements were sharp, aggressive, all pretense of daughterly affection abandoned. I'll challenge this will in court, she announced, spinning to face Jim. Mom was clearly not in her right mind. Cancer, medications, emotional distress. Any judge will see she wasn't competent to make these decisions. Jim opened another file with practiced calm. I have medical records from 3 separate psychiatric evaluations confirming your mother's full mental capacity at the time of will preparation. Then she was coerced, manipulated. Emily's voice pitched higher with desperation. He must have contacted her somehow, played on her guilt about the divorce. The will was prepared by 3 independent attorneys and witnessed by a notary, Jim continued methodically. Your mother explicitly requested these precautions to prevent exactly this type of challenge. Emily grabbed for her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled through contacts. My lawyer will find ways to challenge this. There are always technicalities, procedural errors, something. Feel free to consult with counsel, Jim replied with professional courtesy that barely concealed steel. However, I should mention that your mother also prepared a countersuit clause. Anyone challenging the will frivolously will forfeit their inheritance entirely. The phone slipped from Emily's fingers, clattering onto the marble table. She wouldn't have... Emily's voice was barely a whisper now. Your mother was quite thorough in her planning, Jim confirmed. She anticipated every possible challenge and prepared accordingly. Emily turned to me, her eyes wild with desperation. You don't even want it. You said yourself you don't understand modern business. Why are you taking everything I've worked for? Emmy, I'm not taking your future away. I'm reclaiming my past. Your past? She laughed, but it sounded more like sobbing. You walked away from us. You abandoned your family for 20 years. Now you show up and expect to inherit what Mom built without you? Your mother built it with the foundation we created together, I said quietly. She just forgot that for a while. Jim cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps this would be a good time to mention the employment clause in the will? Emily's head snapped toward him. What employment clause? Your inheritance is contingent upon working for the company under Mr. Harlan's supervision for 3 years. The position comes with a competitive salary and the opportunity to prove your value to the organization. Work for him? Emily's voice cracked with disbelief. Take orders from a construction worker who doesn't even own a decent car? Or forfeit your inheritance entirely, Jim confirmed matter-of-factly. Emily stared at both of us, her perfect composure completely shattered. Her shoulders sagged as the full weight of her situation finally sank in. The empire she'd expected to inherit was gone, transformed into a job application she wasn't sure she wanted to fill out. Without another word, she walked to the door, her movements mechanical, defeated. As it closed behind her, the silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibility. The silence Emily left behind felt different from the tension we'd lived through. For the first time in hours, I could hear my own breathing, could feel the weight of what had just happened settling into my bones. Jim moved quietly around the conference table, organizing documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd guided families through countless crises. He didn't speak, sensing I needed space to process the magnitude of what I'd inherited. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind my back, staring out at the Pacific Ocean, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. 42 floors below, traffic moved in orderly patterns, people heading home from work, unaware that a 70-year-old construction worker had just become a multi-millionaire. I don't feel triumph, Jim, The words came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Just sadness. Justice doesn't always bring joy, Bob. His voice was gentle, understanding. Sometimes it just restores balance. Margaret's face on that hospital screen kept replaying in my mind. The woman who'd betrayed me, destroyed our marriage, built an empire on lies and manipulation, and then spent her final months trying to make amends. How do you reconcile loving someone with hating what they'd become? On Jim's desk, tucked between legal documents and business cards, sat a small framed photograph. Emily at maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, pigtails, sitting on Margaret's lap at what looked like a company picnic, before everything fell apart, before money and ambition poisoned our family. She was a good kid once, I said, touching the frame gently. She still could be. Jim's tone held cautious optimism. People can change, even at 45. What do I do with all this? I don't even remember how to run a business. You'll have help. Margaret arranged for a transition period. Experienced managers, financial advisors, a complete support system. Jim pulled out another folder, thick with organizational charts and contact information. She thought of everything. The seagull appeared at the window again, bold as ever, studying us with those beady black eyes. Margaret would have laughed, would have made some comment about persistence paying off. Can we meet tomorrow? I asked, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day crushing down on me. I need time to process everything, figure out what comes next. Of course. 9 a.m.? I nodded, then paused at something I'd been thinking about during Emily's legal tantrum. Jim, about Emily's employment requirement. The 3-year clause? What if we made it more than just punishment? What if we created real opportunities for her to learn, to grow? Not just marking time until she gets her inheritance, but actually becoming someone who deserves it? Jim studied me carefully. That's generous, considering how she treated you today. She's my daughter. Family isn't something you abandon, even when they abandon you. Walking toward the door, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Hundreds of employees depending on the company's success. Emily's future hanging in the balance of decisions I'd make. Margaret's legacy waiting to be either redeemed or destroyed. I shook Jim's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Thank you for everything. For protecting Margaret's wishes, for defending me when I couldn't defend myself. It's been my privilege, Bob. Margaret chose well. As I reached for the door handle, I realized I had no idea what came next. The drive back to Sacramento would give me time to think. But first, I needed to sit in my own chair and figure out who I was supposed to become. The familiar creak of my apartment door felt like stepping into another lifetime. 3 hours ago, I'd been a struggling retiree. Now I owned a multi-million-dollar company and didn't know what that meant. The drive up Interstate 5 had passed in a blur of processing and planning, the Honda's radio playing soft jazz while my mind raced through possibilities and responsibilities. Every mile between Los Angeles and Sacramento had felt like traveling further from the corporate world and closer to the simple life I'd built from the ruins of my marriage. My evening ritual began automatically. Tea kettle on the stove, reaching for the porcelain teapot Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. One of the few things she'd let me take when we divorced, probably because she'd already moved on to more expensive tastes. While the water heated, I pulled out the photo album from the shelf above my reading chair. Pages of memories I hadn't looked at in months, maybe years. There, the grand opening of our first coffee shop, Harlan's Brew. Margaret radiant in a simple yellow dress, me in my best suit, Emily perched between us wearing a miniature apron that said, "Future Boss." We'd believed in something then, not just the business, but each other. The future had seemed as limitless as Emily's smile in that photograph. "I guess you understood this too late, Maggie," I whispered to the picture, tracing Margaret's young face with a weathered finger. The tea was ready. I settled into my worn reading chair, the same spot where I'd processed the divorce papers 20 years ago, where I'd read about Margaret's business successes in trade magazines, where I'd grieved the family we might have been. My leather journal lay on the side table, pages filled with construction schedules and grocery lists and random thoughts about life after 70. Tonight, I wrote about justice and responsibility, about inherited empires and lost daughters. The phone felt heavy in my hands as I dialed Jim's number. "Jim, about tomorrow's meeting. I want to discuss opportunities for Emily. A pause. Are you certain, after everything she said today? She's my daughter. Family isn't something you abandon. What did you have in mind? I looked at that photo again. 3 people who'd loved each other once, before ambition and betrayal tore us apart. Real partnerships, not just the minimum 3-year requirement, but genuine chances to learn and contribute. Maybe she can find her way back to who she used to be. And if she doesn't want to change, then I'll know I did everything possible. After hanging up, I sat with the photo album open across my lap, studying faces and remembering laughter. Emily learning to make coffee at age 10, standing on a wooden crate behind the counter. Margaret teaching her the business, back when the business was about community and good coffee, not stock options and market share. Forgiveness isn't about them, I realized. It's about me, about choosing hope over bitterness, about breaking the cycle of hurt that had poisoned 3 generations. I pulled out a sheet of my simple stationery, the kind I'd used for 40 years. If Margaret could find courage for difficult truths in her final days, I could find courage to reach out to my daughter one more time. Walking into Jim's office the next morning felt entirely different. Yesterday, I'd been defending myself. Today I was planning a future, not just mine, but hopefully Emily's too. You look better, Jim observed, pouring coffee from an expensive machine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I feel better, clearer. I accepted the cup gratefully. About Emily, I want to create real opportunities for her. Division head positions, strategic planning roles, genuine responsibility with room for growth. Jim raised an eyebrow. That's noble, but will she appreciate this opportunity? Maybe not immediately, but I'll know I did everything possible. We spent 2 hours reviewing company structure, financial projections, employee profiles. Margaret had indeed thought of everything: transition teams, training programs, mentorship systems. She'd built not just a business, but a framework for healing. The documents felt official and final as I signed them. Robert Harlan, majority owner of Harlan Organic Industries. The signature looked strange, like someone else's handwriting. There's one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. I want to write Emily a letter, something personal, not corporate, an invitation to rebuild what we lost. After the meeting, I drove to Santa Monica Beach, needing ocean air and perspective before returning to Sacramento. The Pacific stretched endlessly westward, waves washing away footprints and leaving clean sand for new journeys. Margaret had loved this beach. We'd brought Emily here when she was small, building sandcastles and chasing seagulls. Before success became more important than family. Before betrayal replaced trust. The evening light was fading when I finally sat down at my kitchen table with the letter I'd started the night before. Dear Emily, I wrote slowly, choosing each word carefully. I want to restore not just the company, but our family. Your mother's final gift wasn't money. It was the chance for us to begin again. The pen moved steadily across familiar stationery, offering partnership instead of punishment, hope instead of resentment. I told her about the business opportunities I wanted to create, the real authority she could earn, the family relationship we might rebuild if she chose to try. I know you're angry, I continued. You have every right to be, but anger doesn't have to be permanent. People can change, even when it seems impossible. The family photograph sat beside my writing pad. 3 people smiling at a cafe opening 25 years ago. Before everything went wrong, before we forgot what mattered. I'll be here when you're ready, I concluded the letter. Whether that's tomorrow or next year or never. But I'll be here, and the door will always be open. Sealing the envelope, I addressed it carefully to Emily's Beverly Hills address. Jim would make sure she received it, along with the formal business proposals and employment contracts. True inheritance isn't money, I thought, looking at our family photo one more time. It's the chance to begin again, to choose love over fear, to build bridges instead of walls. I set down my pen and looked at the photo of our family at the cafe opening. 3 people smiling, believing in tomorrow. Maybe we could find that again. Maybe Emily would surprise me, or maybe she wouldn't. But I would know I'd chosen love over bitterness, hope over fear. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.